Hello fellow humans and welcome back to the channel. So I've been doing a lot of Linux focused content these past few weeks and I've never really answered the question of why you should switch to Linux. Now I did talk about my experience switching to Linux and I've also been forcing my friends to install Linux. But today with this video I want to answer the question of why you should switch to Linux right now. So without further ado, let's begin. Now, one of the main questions that a lot of people have is, why should I switch to Linux if I'm perfectly happy on my current operating system, whether it be Windows, macOS or something else? The answer to that is Linux simply offers a degree of freedom that is not possible at all with these proprietary operating systems. Now, when you use Windows or macOS, it's not only you that owns the operating system, but the company that sold you that operating system also has a share of control over it. Now, let us assume there's a new Windows update. You have the option of delaying a Windows update, but you never have the option of not updating your Windows operating system at all. Now, I could understand if this was only for some critical security updates, but you cannot decline any sort of update, whether it be a security update or even a feature update. On the other hand, in Linux, you own your system, you and you alone. So you can install whatever update you want, you can decline whatever update you want, including security updates, though I don't recommend that. And at the end of the day, in Linux, you are in complete control of dictating what your operating system can or cannot do. Another reason why you should switch to Linux is that it's highly customizable. And by customization, I don't mean installing a few themes or icon sets. Let's say for example in Windows, you don't like the default file explorer. Well, there's no way to tweak it or change it, so you're essentially stuck with it. But in Linux, there's an easy and simple way to fix such problems. If you don't like the file manager, change it. If you don't like the web browser, change it. If you don't like the Office suite, change it. If you don't like the entire desktop, how it works, how it feels itself, just completely rip out and install a new desktop. It's completely open and free and you can do loads of things with Linux. Now this is another reason why two Linux systems never look the same, because each person, as they gradually use Linux, craft it into their own operating system. Now the same cannot be said about two Windows systems because there's only so much that Microsoft allows you to customize in its operating system. So that's why Linux is an excellent option if you really want to make your operating system your own and make it work the way you want it to work. Now another advantage with Linux is that it's completely free and open source. So the barrier of entry into Linux is almost non-existent, and almost all of the distributions are completely free of cost to download and use and even modify, because free and open source means that the source code of the operating system is also freely available online for everyone to view. So that is another advantage of Linux. Linux is also way more secure than Windows or macOS. Now, some might think that because Linux is open source and the entire source code is available publicly for anyone to view, it is easy for hackers to find and exploit vulnerabilities in the code. But this is simply not true, because there are a lot of Linux developers who also have access to the same operating system code, and if a vulnerability was ever to be found, they would fix it immediately. So due to the sheer amount of people in the Linux community working towards fixing the vulnerabilities, they're usually fixed before anyone can exploit them. So Linux is way more secure than Windows, macOS and other proprietary operating systems. Linux is also a perfect fit for old or low spec hardware. If you have an old computer lying around that you're not using much because it's become slow and clunky with a lot of Windows updates, you can try breathing new life into it by installing a couple of Linux distributions which are optimized for low-end hardware or older systems. Alright, but this is not to say that Linux is the absolute perfect operating system which does not have any flaws, even though it is. There are a few drawbacks that could be deal breakers for a few people, but there are easy workarounds for all of them. So let me talk about a few of those. One of the main misconceptions that a lot of people have is Linux does not support all their apps, softwares or programs that they use on Windows or macOS. Now this is true to some extent because a lot of companies simply don't make Linux versions of their programs because Linux users are a very small market share compared to Windows and macOS users in the desktop PC world. A few professional software suites like the Adobe Creative Cloud and Microsoft Office are not available on Linux, but there are loads of alternatives for them. Instead of using apps like Photoshop and Premiere, there are open source alternatives like GIMP for photo editing and Kdenlive for video editing, and there's a whole host of office suites that could replace Microsoft Office. I'm currently running LibreOffice. It's a free and open source office suite that comes pre-installed on almost all of the Linux distributions that I have used so far. Also, a lot of proprietary software has slowly been making its way into the Linux ecosystem, as a lot of companies are now slowly developing Linux versions of their apps. So programs like Microsoft Teams, Discord, Skype, Google Chrome, Zoom, all these kind of proprietary apps and programs are still available for Linux. There are also other fantastic open source applications like Audacity for audio editing and VLC Media Player for playing videos. And these apps are so good that even a lot of Windows users use these on a daily basis. So yeah, program and software availability on Linux is almost a non-issue nowadays. Another problem that you might have with Linux is hardware support. And again, since Linux users are a very small portion of desktop users worldwide, a lot of companies don't even bother making drivers for hardware on Linux, or the driver implementation is usually poor and rudimentary. Nvidia is one of the manufacturers who is criticized most for their lackluster hardware support for Linux, as their drivers are not usually that good. Now, I don't have personal experience with this because I don't use an Nvidia graphics card, but I did experience the hardware issue with my laptop when I first installed Linux, as it had a Broadcom Wi-Fi adapter. Now, Broadcom's drivers are not open source, they're actually proprietary drivers, so they don't come pre-installed on almost any distribution. But it was a simple fix. I just had to go in and install the driver by myself, and after that it worked fine. But your mileage may vary depending on what kind of driver support your manufacturer has for Linux. Now let us address one more big question, and that is gaming on Linux. Now, if you had asked me what the answer was a couple of years back, I would have said it would never happen, because almost all games are written for Windows and DirectX 11, which is their, graphics driver or something. But this has changed drastically in the last few years thanks to Valve's Proton Engine. So Proton is a sort of a compatibility layer on top of Linux, which allows you to play DirectX 11 games built for working on Windows systems on Linux. Now sure, the implementation is not that perfect, not all games are going to work, but most games nowadays are working fine, and support for the games which don't work is also coming soon thanks to Valve's new product, the Steam Deck. I keep saying Stream Deck, oh my god. So with the launch of the Steam Deck, Valve has promised that every game on the Steam store will run on it perfectly. And since the Steam Deck is running on Arch Linux, this means that all the games on the Steam store by extension will run on Linux as well. So this is really an exciting time for Linux gaming, and if you're a gamer / streamer who's on Windows, consider switching to Linux right now. So those were a few reasons why you should switch to Linux right now from Windows, macOS or any other operating system. Now if you like this video, hit like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff, and to be notified when I release my next video, make sure to turn on the notifications. And also, yeah, try Linux, just try it and maybe switch to it. It's better, trust me. Until next time, live long and prosper.